Thank you. Hello. I usually start off a little nervous at first, but then I ease on in. So, first of all, I wanted to thank Jan Harzan and Bob Woods for inviting me. I know this is traditionally a very nuts and bolts kind of organization, so I hope you don't feel like I'm cramming my information down your throat. I'd like you to kind of suspend your disbelief for a moment and wonder, what if? What could be different about civilization right now if these technologies exist and if they were released?
Turn it up!
Can you hear me?
No good.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Better?
That's fine.
Better?
That's better.
Okay. All right. Trying to get the first slide going here. Oh, there we go. I also want to thank Renee Armenta and Roger Richards for putting this together. They put together some amazing work. Some of the artists also put together closer renditions of the spacecraft that were observed, as well as some of William Tompkins' designs, you'll see. So how does one qualify as a whistleblower? What is a whistleblower? A person who informs on a person or an organization engaged in illicit activity. Now, some of the unacknowledged programs, is this going live? Okay. Better?
Turn that up.
Mm-hmm. It's on. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. I have a very weak voice. So, thank you. What about the secret space program, the unacknowledged programs? What about that is illicit? As we've heard several other speakers and people that have put out recent videos say, a lot of these programs are they're illegal by definition. They're unacknowledged. The way they're being funded is through very dark means. So this is something that has been public knowledge for a while. So if an individual feels obligated to come forward and give this information, they're given a classification as being a whistleblower. Now, there's a lot of different ideas on how to vet a whistleblower. The proper documentation, when available, should definitely be provided. We should also look for any type of supporting evidence, further documentation, corroborating documentation that matches their story that's not public knowledge. And the last is testimony, which is often the most dubious, because the whole nature of these programs is for everything to basically not exist in this world. So these programs are built around strict secrecy, and pretty much any documentation can only be accessed in a skiff room. The information it's very unlikely for it to make it outside of the skiff room. Now, in order to maintain secrecy, they also use a lot of protocols. They'll use the same operational names, but have deeper operations classified under that operation name. So it causes confusion when people do research. And they keep strict control over all evidence. And I think I got a little ahead of myself there. Okay, so I've been doing a show for a couple of years, if you haven't heard, called Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock. And it's basically been two guys kind of doing a briefing, with a, fake brick wall behind us, and a little bit of a set, but it's mainly been about the information. And I really didn't expect it to be so wildly popular. In that series, I've talked about what we call the MyLab programs. And MyLab just simply stands for military abduction. Now, some programs have come out, like MK Ultra, some of the programs they did, back in the 50s and 60s in the civilian population secretly. Well, using civilian assets is something that they've done as well. And with civilian assets, there's even less chance of documentation. My grandfather was a part of some experiment that was similar to Project Whitecoat, according to family lore. I grew up hearing that he was a Seventh-day Adventist, was a conscientious objector, and when he was drafted, he went in and agreed to go into this alternate program. And in this program, he was given different viruses or bacteria, depending on which program he was in. And he got very ill, and for a couple of weeks, he was sitting up with a pillow behind his back, and his back fused that way. So he was on disability from that for his whole life. And we were never allowed to talk about his time in the military. It was some big secret. And it was something that, it was discussed, that he was a part of a secret experiment. Dr. Sala has recently had Freedom of Information Act requests put in. Some information has come back on my grandfather. I think we're waiting for some more of the medical information to come back, but there were no real flags that popped up. Unfortunately, I was hoping that we would get some sort of documentation. And apparently, this program that he involved himself in was a multi-generational program that he may not have realized about. He most likely didn't. Apparently, before we'd even discovered genetics, we were delivering genetic changes to people through viruses, using viruses as carriers. And that has been done through, that's also been done through vaccines to the general population. I don't think there are many here that I'll have to convince of that. So I was also identified, I was definitely popping up on the radar for that, being involved in this family that was a part of this program. But I was further identified during standardized testing in school. I popped up as an anomaly. They sent a person out to do a one-on-one interview with me, had me go through, do all these different tests, even had me draw. And then there was one more person that I ended up talking to. Her name was Mrs. Hill. She ended up being involved quite a bit, and she's the one that administered a lot of the different, tests with the different psychic deck cards, having you guess, having you what's in another room in an envelope, trying to, see if you could figure it out. And I was, only like 6 years old. It was very bizarre. And apparently I was identified as being, there's a spectrum, intuitive empath spectrum, and I was identified as being well within the two, which they thought would be useful, and they're able to enhance that with genetic manipulation. Now, they had placed me in alternative classes with my parents' permission. My parents had no idea that it was a part of any type of military program. But they did know that I would be going off campus and fairly often. And what would occur is that a white van would pick usually just myself up and drive me out to Carswell Air Force Base. And, a person recently asked me about, where on the base it was, because they had worked there and been assigned there for a good period of time. I described, how they would always take us through the back entrance, back gate. We would drive across at least two runways, take a right, go through another security gate, and then end up in a motor pool hangar for cars. And when I described that to her, she had a pretty good idea of where it was. And in that motor pool area, they had built it for, I think in the beginning they had built it for protection against nuclear strikes. It was an underground, underground kind of facility area that was underneath Carswell. And we'd be taken there through an elevator, like a cargo elevator. And, and that's where we would go a lot of the time. Now, often, as strange as this sounds, they would pick kids up in the middle of the night, parents would not know, and you would show up with, you'd see the usual 9 to 15 kids that you were training with and spending time with. There would be other kids that would, kind of wash out or have issues and not stay with a group. But you would get together with all these other groups or cells and have training at night in these big indoor malls that they have in Texas. And I'm sure they had them here, but this was back in the 70s. A lot of the training, they would further profile you to see, what you were good at, what your talents were, and how they could use them. They used a lot of sensory deprivation, in tanks of water. You would have no idea how long you were in. Virtual reality simulation that was definitely far beyond the technology of that era that we knew about in public. And they had pharmaceutical, like gene therapy that they were giving that would enhance the intuitive empath abilities that you already had. And then, unfortunately, they also did a lot of training where they would subject you, usually in the virtual reality simulations, to trauma along with your team, and it would force you to bond, or they would want you to bond with an adult. They would play, those kinds of games. They also trained us when I got a little older. They started to train me in traditional firearms, some hand-to-hand. I learned. I trained in judo with my grandfather and aikido, but they taught us some different hand-to-hand that was pretty actually similar to judo. Wayfinding, they taught us things like judging things at the size of something at a distance and being able to calculate how far away it was, and basic radio and communication protocols. And these were just the basics that they plan to expand upon in the future. Now, the acclimation to the non-terrestrials. That began to happen very early on. Most of us had weird memories or dreams of, as strange as this sounds, like Peter Pan, pirate ships coming in the middle of the night to pick us up and taking us to various locations. We shared that dream. And it turns out that we were being introduced before we were in the programs even to non-terrestrials. And then they slowly started to introduce us to them. You would go into a virtual reality simulation, and there would be a couple of doctors, maybe military, sitting at a card table. And then when you would go through the simulation and you would come out, and then there would be a gray or a different type of non-terrestrial sitting at the table all of a sudden. No one would say anything about it. You would just get up and walk out. And they would start to slowly acclimate you to these beings, because it can be quite overwhelming. There were hybrid children that we also saw in these programs and at the Air Force Base, underground anyway. There was the use of maglev trains. There were different devices that used bioneural interfacing, to where you would interface directly with your mind. And they were beginning to develop a lot of the craft with that type of ability towards the end, and I'm sure they're flying around with it now. And I think many know, they've heard Bob Lazar talk about, he realized that he didn't know what happened at work that day, or the previous day. He was being basically blank slated. There are many in the military, maybe even some people that are in this room right now, that have willingly gone through that process for patriotic reasons, that know, they're doing something important. At the end of the day, they know they're going to be blank slated. That's something that's done fairly commonly. Drafted into the SSP. Basically, they were training me as a civilian asset to be used. In these programs, the MyLab programs, there would be kids that were destined to work in, I guess, what we would call the cabal, or different organized crime organizations on the earth. It was not common for them to be, I guess, trained and groomed to go off planet. It didn't seem that common. Most of the people that were training ended up working here. At the LOC, of course, they did all types of scans that were like full body, what we would think of as a full body MRI now. They were taking blood work. I was getting injections. I wasn't being told what they were. And it was the Christmas break of 1986. It was just before I was 17, and they were having me sign all these legal documents that it's not even legal. Originally, I was assigned to the research vessel, but the person that was the current captain did not want me on there. They had had a few incidents to where they had some of the very young civilian assets come on the research vessel, and they spend 3 to 6 months with the kid sobbing in his rack. So they didn't want to deal with that. They wanted to make sure that I was more prepared when I came back to serve. So they assigned me to this program that was called the Intruder, Intercept, and Interrogate, the I3 program, and it was similar to the Men in Black program, except that they were doing mainly the interrogation of these beings, finding out why they were here, who they were. A lot of times they were being, the regular military had been arresting these people, and they found out that they were not really people. They had found a way to blend in. And there were even incidents of some of these beings working in high-rise buildings, blending in with us. And most of the time, they were just studying us and learning our culture and how to blend in. But these people would be, if they did not tell us why they were here, they would be put under different types of enhanced interrogation. What they wanted were the intuitive empaths, usually 3 to triangulate on any one being or person, to sit there and look for any pings of deception, fear, different emotions that the interrogator can use, unfortunately, against who they're interrogating. And it was not pleasant. This program I was involved with for almost a year, about 10 months. Also, it's interesting, the Lunar Operation Command is basically air traffic control for around a certain distance around the Earth. And they would work very closely. If a craft would come in, would not provide a friend or foe signal, they would be intercepted and interrogated in some fashion. And depending on the answers they received from the person being interrogated, they would end up in a detention facility, one of several, and they would end up being released to their non-terrestrial group. Here's the first image of the 3-dimensional rendering that we have of the interstellar research vessel. Now, Solar Warden, it started around 1980, and it was a baby of the ONI. The Navy controlled it, and they were very proud of that program. Project Solar Warden hasn't been used since the 90s. It merged with other programs. It's changed names several times. I don't know what the current program name is, the current naval program name. Their mandate was originally to protect the solar system, to go to other solar systems, do surveillance, recon, looking for threats. They had noted that few of the beings visiting us were hostile or didn't really care about human life at all. Kind of, like many of us would smash a bug. They really didn't have any compassion. So they also were doing a lot of scientific research, R&D, that type of work. And these craft were modular. They would be able to separate them and put in different modules to make them. They could be like a hospital ship. They could change the configuration, and they could do that in the larger cruisers as well. Arnold Sommerfeld was, I guess, an individual that first started talking about tachyons. And his photo was hanging in the mess hall. An older image of him than that. Mainly worked with eggheads. When they would have me working with the scientists, they would call me a specialist. When they had me working with the engineers, they'd call me a tech, even though I was really not a specialist. They basically had to train me in everything in the beginning. I did spend a lot of, and there was a lot of boredom, a lot of mundane type activities, but I did spend a lot of time on this smart glass pad that it had a bioneural type interface on it, and it looked almost like just a piece of plexiglass, unremarkable. So it would display somewhat of 3D information, as well as old photographs, what would look like scans of old documents, and then it also had a connection to a database that, depending on who you were when you were identified as using the device, it depended on the access you would have. The history. Of course, Nikola Tesla. He developed free energy technology, wireless transmission of energy. The elite saw that they couldn't put a meter on it, so they had to suppress it. So, Tesla is one of many great scientists that has been discredited or taken out by the government in some way. After his death, all of his research was confiscated, and interestingly enough, John G. Trump, which is the current POTUS's uncle. So I think that there's a good chance that maybe through family lore, Trump may have heard about some of these technologies. And I was told that he put out a secret memo, that he wanted us to begin declassifying some of what I was told is now 8,000 classified patents out there. And he was given pushback that it would take at least 10 years to get that going. And he apparently, from what I'm told, was pushing back, trying to get the technologies revealed. We've all heard of Victor Schauberger, torsion physics observed in fish and fluids. He was a naturalist and philosopher, an inventor, and he met Hitler in 1934. And after that, he became one of many that were forced to work for the Nazis. The amount of slave labor that was going on was touched on by Tompkins, and it was a crazy amount of slave labor going on. Of course, the Nazi origins trace back to the Vril Society and the Thule Society. Now, some of these Nazi groups were sending out small parties of like 9 to a dozen men who were going through Tibet and areas of China and interrogating monks that were guarding manuscripts and information. And they were also very interested in a Nordic type of non-terrestrial that many of these monks were in communication with, and they were protecting the entrances to where they were, and the Nazis wanted to get in contact with them. And of course, Maria Orsic, I'm told, was able to definitely get in contact through her group, the Vril Society, through at first telepathically, and began to get a lot of very technical information that they were able to show to various people within the Nazi Party that saw that this was actual, she wasn't receiving gibberish. And of course, Operation Paperclip, I was told that it was quite a bit more than 1,600 German scientists that were obtained by the United States, that many more were obtained and went into deep, dark programs. But, you know, this was pretty much, the US didn't realize that this was an infiltration. This, you know, this Nazi group was basically coming in to infiltrate. And their plan was to take over the military-industrial complex. You know, we were able to build 10 planes for every one of theirs. They wanted to use that industrial might to colonize space and build out all of this technology in space. Now, Paperclip was a Navy-controlled operation. The program was run by a newly formed Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, which later became the CIA around the same time that the Air Force was implemented. It was officially titled as the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, led by Admiral Byrd. Now, they stated that they were there for training of personnel and testing equipment in frigid conditions, and they had a lot of problems during World War II with just that. And they were also, they denied this later, but they were also looking to expand United States sovereignty over that area. And they were looking to determine if they could build bases there, as well as investigate bases that we had been receiving intelligence reports on during the time, since the time of Tompkins when he was in service. So, I think I covered all this. Okay, so the Lunar Operation Command. That was originally built by this, what Richard Dolan, using his terminology, breakaway civilization. It was a Nazi breakaway group, and they had started a small footprint on the moon. And when they originally built this facility, it really was shaped like a swastika. But they built it out later to break up the look of the swastika. The way it was built, depending on your access, if you were the programs and you were able to get to the Lunar Operation Command, you may only know of the surface facilities. Below, it went down, shaped kind of like a bell, and there were many levels of facilities where they, depending on your access, you wouldn't even know about the facilities. Here's kind of a look at the way it used to appear. And then we're going to go, in the crater, there was an area that looked like another mini crater, but when you flew into it, you appeared inside this area that I was trying to describe earlier. And the craft would enter through these different hangar bays. The base has a type of cloaking that if you're looking at it from above, it looks like a mirage effect. You see nothing but moonscape, but with just a slightly little mirage. And and you can't tell the base is there at all. And it is on the dark side of the moon at about the 10 o'clock position. Now, the Germans actually had a little bit of a footprint on Mars, but were having a lot of difficulty there. But eventually, after the paperclip people had infiltrated the military-industrial complex and were working for a lot of these defense contractors. Eventually, they were able to set up meetings around 1952 with US government officials and the breakaway group that had moved down to Nazi in parts of Argentina. In 1952, I guess we were teetering on not making a deal with them, so they apparently flew over Washington, D.C., and they did that to coerce the US government into working with them because they knew that the most important secret to the United States government was the existence of anti-gravity and free energy technology that was classified, of the highest classification, because they believed it would destroy civilization as we knew it, the financial system. And unfortunately, one of the things that it's been most difficult to talk about, there is a major problem going on with slave labor. And I'm sure Tompkins touched on it as well as Sala. This is something that is going to be a major shocker if there is any type of full disclosure. It's more than anything, the existence of aliens. I think recently Hollywood has decided that we're ready because they've made us ready. But the people finding out about some of these crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated to keep the secret, that's what's really going to flip a lot of people out. Now, these corporations started coming together. Part of the compartmentalization is they moved a lot of these operations out of military hands and into corporate hands. So these corporations, they started getting a lot of power. The interplanetary corporate conglomerate, basically people retiring from the military or from the board of one of these well-known defense contracting companies, as they're retiring, they'll say, listen, there's a lot more you can do. We want you to join this super board. And then they'll join this super board, and then they'll find out about a whole different level of technologies that are out there in our solar system and beyond. Pretty much the corporate conglomerate runs most of what's going on out in space. They have a lot of influence over the Lunar Operation Command. I wouldn't quite say they run it, but they do control a lot of the facilities down in Antarctica that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And talking about the R&D facilities they have down in Antarctica caused quite a stir recently. How do they normally keep you quiet? Usually they'll blackmail you, bribe you, or they'll just threat to murder you. A lot of the time, they'll profile you out, know how to manipulate you, and find a way to put you in a position, you'll compromise yourself, and then they'll blackmail you for your entire career, and then you become an asset. There are a lot of secret societies. People that have proven that they can keep a secret and have gone through these different levels to be a part of these secret societies, they're entrusted with a lot of this technology. And a lot of the engineers that work on these projects are also members of these societies. And as we said, and I'm not going to go too deep into it because it's very disturbing stuff, that there is human and child trafficking involved, especially with the corporate types. It's something that I don't know. I'll just keep going. Now, what's the difference between the Navy and the Air Force program? At the time of Project Paperclip, the U.S. Air Force hadn't even been set up yet. It was still the Army. All mega powers from the military-industrial complex were controlled by the Navy at the time, naval intelligence. And some of the first ships that they had developed with these different types of electrogravitic and torsion field drives, they were able to convert submarines into basically spaceships to, for proof of concept. Now, select members of the Navy, they worked close with defense contractors, Nazi scientists, and in complete secrecy. It's been brought up that they were able to develop the nuclear bomb in complete secrecy with compartmentalization, misdirection, and a number of people were murdered and taken out. Well, the same thing has, same tactics are in use today. And of course, a lot of these unacknowledged programs, they're not really documented at all. And when you do find a document, it's not going to say, top secret on it. It's not going to have a designation at all. It's just going to look like something weird and crazy that you can't type back to anyone most of the time. And a lot of times they're in a really weird code that only they understand. And if a researcher would receive it, they'd be spinning their wheels trying to figure out what these acronyms and different things mean. Now, Hollywood has definitely played a role in the disclosure of this program. Gene Roddenberry definitely used the Navy theme for Star Trek. Now, it is very possible, and from talking with Jay Widener and a few other people, they believe that he was briefed. He was given a briefing and the general information about the naval program to be able to duplicate it for a television show. So this may very well be part of them seeding our consciousness right now for disclosure. The Air Force program, it mostly operates within probably 500 miles of the Earth's atmosphere. They had, the last I heard, they had two different space stations that were basically about 40, 60 years ahead of the ISS technology, and they were fairly large and were made out of pieces of rockets and other things that had been injected into lower orbit and then towed out. There were also satellites, manned satellites, that would have like 3 to 6 people stationed in them, and they were usually for surveillance of not only our NATO allies, but NATO enemies. And as far as the Air Force is concerned, it's hyper secret, but we do have a small footprint on the moon and a very small footprint on Mars as far as a small base. Very, very unusual that any of the people in this group would be briefed about any of the facilities on Mars and about slave labor. This program was, I guess, President Reagan was he was given briefings that caught his attention and inspired him in promoting this strategic defensive initiative. And the goal was to develop a space-based anti-missile platform publicly. Now, at this time, they were developing a lot of the technology that they were actually building out the ships that they were going to use in Solar Warden. And the Brilliant Pebbles, that was an operation or a project that I heard about on the smart glass pads that had to do with the asteroid belt. It was apparent that at one time it was some sort of a planet, but very little of that planet would still be there, a very small percentage, and they were trying to figure out what size it used to be, the density, and they were doing mathematical models. Now, what is the difference? We've been hearing full disclosure and partial disclosure a lot. Drip, drip disclosure, you'll hear. Partial disclosure is a slow release of information to the public over many decades. the revealing of the military-industrial complex program, which I was describing earlier, within 500 miles of the atmosphere. They have a lot of connections to the DIA and Air Force intelligence. A lot of them believe that ETs had visited us in the past. We found unexplainable ruins on different bodies in our solar system, but many of them believe that either there are no current visitations by non-terrestrials, or that at most there are 4 or a handful that are visiting us very sporadically to observe our civilization. So as a part of this disclosure, they plan on revealing ancient artifacts and remnants of civilizations that they found on the ocean floor. And then that will lead up to them announcing that they found similar signs of civilizations under the ice in Antarctica. When they do that, I was told that they plan on also revealing the Air Force program, a lot of these TR-3B type craft, and the existence of these space stations. Any of the other programs, the deep space programs, are not going to be acknowledged, and they plan on rolling that out very slowly. Full disclosure would basically be a major document and information dump on the population, with letting them know the existence of zero-point energy, different suppressed technologies, healing, anti-aging technologies, and once again, the information about the crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated to keep the secret. This is the part that I really want to talk about, is true disclosure can only come from the people. If we sit back and wait for someone to walk to a podium and make an announcement, I think we're just going to keep waiting. So I think that a lot of people getting this information out to the wider public is really important right now. It'd be great to get people work on petitions, do marches, start to take the energy that's between, I guess, the left and the right, and instead of pointing the energy at each other, find a way to, point it at the people that are trying to divide us and demand these technologies, because it would change all the things that we're arguing about would be changed overnight. And I think that really, people like us, there's a lot we can't agree on, but what we can agree is that I liked the way Bob Woods put it recently on Ancient Aliens. He says, I want the truth. I don't care what it is. I just want the truth. And when the truth comes out, many of us are going to have to rewrite what we thought was reality. Now, this is the information that caused a lot of stir and caused problems for the people sharing the information with me. Under the ice has been described what they kind of jokingly call a Pompeii on ice. They found a civilization that was destroyed very quickly, and there were remnants of that civilization that were not exactly human. They named these the pre-Adamites, and they had elongated skulls, strange rib cages, were a little bit taller, and they apparently arrived here, crash landing, coming here and getting stuck here, and they found 3 craft deep under the ice that these beings arrived in, and they jokingly named them the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And some of the structures that they found under the ice, they are completely flattened and destroyed, but they look very similar to Pumapunku. Now, pay attention to this video. This is video that was top secret for a long time. It was Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm went to, I believe, Greenland and secretly built a base there and didn't tell them that was a ICBM launch facility. Now, what's interesting is that in Antarctica, they have taken this same concept and have built these huge R&D facilities in the ice. And these facilities, once they build them, they travel with the ice flow, a couple feet a day, I think. So basically, the Army Corps of Engineers helped develop this out, as well as an Air Force engineering group. And this was almost successful. When they tried to land the plane to deliver the nuclear missiles, the plane crashed. And then Greenland found out, and they were unable to use it as a missile base. But this exact modular concept is being used down in Antarctica, and later on, this modular concept of building was used. It was done quite a bit in the craft. Everything was modular, but when they built bases on other bodies in our solar system, they used a lot of the similar tactics that they developed here. Now, what types of projects are going on down there? What type of research are they doing? There are just about anything that's illegal or unethical that you would get in trouble for anywhere else in the world, it's going on down here. They're doing a lot of unethical cloning, a lot of R&D on weapons platforms that they're developing. There's a spaceport that was handed over by the Nazis that they had developed out, but we further developed it. And a lot of these triangular craft and some of the Air Force craft are taking off from there to leave and go to low Earth orbit. And yeah, these are all black budget. You know, Lockheed Martin, companies like that are down there doing this research. And most of this is done by the corporations. It is joint, it is stated as being joint ET and human just because the area down there is controlled by non-terrestrials, and we had to basically work with them to get permission. They observe what we do very closely. Now, this is where the problem comes in. In 1959, a treaty was signed, and up to this date, about 53 countries have signed it, and it's very strict. It stipulates that in the interest of mankind, Antarctica shall continue forever to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. And what not only Americans are doing down there with our corporations, but a number of these other countries are also doing very unethical research and development in this area. Now, months back, I was told that anyone that was involved with the Navy narrative of the secret space program, they were going to have a major problem, that there would be a smear campaign. And, you know, different people that have come out about the Navy program have been smeared, and, you know, there are a lot of different things I don't really want to focus on here, but that have gone on that I'm sure you know about. Now, the biggest issue right now is that, you know, there's the lack of interest in the wider population. You know, how do we get this out to the wider population and get them excited not only about information that I'm sharing, but all of the nuts and bolts information? How do we get them involved? Well, I mean, there's a couple of different things that we're trying, and we're hoping to inspire other people to come together and start these grassroots campaigns. But the first thing we're doing is Dr. Michael Sala, Dr. Bob Wood, William Tompkins, and myself are putting together this book series. In the first book, and it will may have different authors, we don't know just yet, but this first book is going to focus some on what is going on in Antarctica, as well as how the secret space program came about. And we're going to try to market this to the general population more than just UFO buffs. And let's see, and just recently, both David Wilcock and Jay Widener have agreed to do forwards for the book. We recently obtained secretspaceprogram.com. That was a coveted URL for a while. And we're going to use it kind of as a portal to, you know, people, when they're directed to secretspaceprogram.com, we're going to redirect them, depending on their interest, to just about anyone you can think of's research, and let them look over the research and come up with their own conclusions. But we hope to do annual summits on the Secret Space Program and interview insiders and whistleblowers that are wanting to come forward, and try to work with the nuts and bolts people that are really good at the documentation part to help us vet some of these people and get the information out. There could be someone sitting in a chair right now that's been wondering if they should come forward with information. And I think now's the best time to do it. Just, make sure you approach very ethical people like you find here at MUFON. And here is an artist's 3D rendition of Tompkins' ship. He may have shown, I don't remember if I saw the drawing that he did when he was still involved in being with the engineering department. So we created a 3D rendering of what it would look like. And this is very similar to the way these craft started to look in the 90s, in the late 90s. They did start to look a lot more stealth-like, a lot like the naval vessels that have been commissioned most recently. Now, before these were developed, this was more of what they had. They were basically built by people who designed and built submarines. This was basically a glorified submarine that, different modifications were made in the design for interstellar travel. Just a couple other. Now, some of the larger cigar craft the link, they would usually be the same circumference, but the links of them could just be unbelievable, kilometers long. And they too were modular. They were able to take them apart, depending on what type of expedition they were going on. They were able to outfit the craft and set up different areas of it to be for science. And the interesting thing is that some of these craft, if they would arrive to a star system and begin gathering telemetry, they begin docking with each other and form sort of a space station. Now, I guess a lot of people are probably nauseated by hearing unity in the community, but I'm really interested in, instead of battling out with people our different perspectives, putting aside these disagreements, even approaches to getting information, and decide that we're going to work together. None of us has the full answer. We all have little pieces to the puzzle, and we want the full picture. It's very possible for us to come together. And there's definitely strength in numbers, and if we can get the wider public approaching them about crashed craft in the desert, or ETs, or even 8-foot-tall blue bird aliens, is not the way to go. Of course, they're going to be more interested in the suppressed technologies and how it directly applies to their life and could enhance their life. Now, one thing that I think we have in common is that we have these two agendas that we want to see happen too. Since the 1950s, people that, when they've been communicated with by non-terrestrials, it's been a very consistent message. They tell us that we need to raise our consciousness or become more spiritual, and then they also say that we need to demand the release of suppressed technologies. I think that's something that we can both come together on. And let's see. Oh, and that's it. So hopefully we can find a way to come together and get this to the wider public. Thank you. Hang on just a second.